Leonora Carrington claimed that she was never born. Instead, she was made. A union between woman and machine. It was a melancholy day when her mother stuffed herself with truffles and oyster puree, causing her to feel fat and bloated. The machine was spectacular and filled with semen from pigs, cockerels, and stallions. It could bring out the greatest pleasure known to women. And it was this merge between human, machine, and animal that caused the conception of Leonora Carrington in 1917. Hello, and welcome to another video. Today we are talking about the Surrealist painter Leonora Carrington. She was part of the Surrealist movement amongst other artists such as Salvador Dali, Max Ernst, who she actually was in a long-term relationship with at one point, and René Magritte, just to name a few. Carrington's paintings were distinguished by a highly detailed and dreamlike tone, featuring magical and otherworldly creatures in imaginary settings, often based on deeply personal symbolism. She was very interested in Celtic mythology because of her Irish heritage, and this comes through in the fantastical and fairy tale-esque imagery of her artworks. She had an eventful life, going through an affair with previously mentioned artist Max Ernst, escaping the Nazis during World War II, severe mental illness and being admitted to a sanatorium, and in today's video we'll be going over her life as well as some of her most important works. Carrington was born in England in 1917 to an English father and an Irish mother. She came from a wealthy family and grew up hearing folk stories from her mother and her Irish nanny. These stories came to fuel the already vast imagination that was apparent from an already young age, and she loved stories written by authors such as Beatrix Potter, Jonathan Swift, and Lewis Carroll. She had an incredible imagination and invented a completely imaginary world filled with fantastical creatures when she was a child. Carrington also started to rebel from an early age due to expectations her family put on her to marry well. Her father was a newly rich textile manufacturer, and he was eager to raise his status within the wealthy society by basically marrying off her daughter to an influential man. Other than Leonora, the family had two sons, so it was expected of Leonora to marry someone who was wealthy. This rebellious behavior led to her being expelled from two different schools, and she was described as having an allergy towards collaboration. Her relationship with his father was also not great, and she has claimed she was more afraid of him than of Hitler. This rebellious attitude continued up until she convinced her parents to let her study at Mrs. Penrose's Academy of Art. Discovering Surrealism was like discovering something that was already familiar to Carrington. This art movement had already taken the world by storm, with art critics thinking the artists were mad and should be locked up in a madhouse. At 19, she visited the first international Surrealist exhibition in London, and later on met artist Max Ernst at a party. The two hit it off, and despite Ernst being 46 years old and Carrington 19, the couple escaped to France together. You know, a tale as old as time. Shortly after their escape to Paris, Carrington painted The Meal of Lord Candlestick. Lord Candlestick was a nickname that Carrington used to refer to her father, and this artwork talks about her rejection of her father. The table can be seen as a representation of one used in her parents' estate dinner hall, and the scene alludes to the Holy Communion with the banquet table surrounded by women devouring a male infant lying on the table. Paris at this time was full of Surrealist artists, and Carrington got to hang out with not only Max Ernst but also Salvador Dali and Pablo Picasso. These people all shared the same fascination with the bizarre and played with ideas of human merging with animals and machines, as well as myths and folk stories. And even though Surrealism was at its core progressive and anti-bourgeois, it still had a long way to go when it came on the views of women. André Breton, the founder of the movement, was fascinated by Freud, and we all know that's a red flag. He thought that the female psyche was inherently mythical and erotic. An artist within the Surrealist movement had this idea that women should be looked at to be muses for the male artists. Carrington's own reply to this was, "I didn't have time to be anyone's muse. I was too busy rebelling against my family and learning to be an artist." During this time, she painted Self-Portrait, also known as the Inn of the Dawn Horse. In this painting, we can see the artist herself, sitting on a blue chair, extending her hand towards a hyena. In the background, we can see a rocking horse that is mirrored by a galloping horse outside the window. The hyena can also be seen as a mirror of the artist, as they're standing opposite each other, the hyena imitating Carrington's pose. The hyena often featured in her art, seeing as she was inspired by the hyena's rebellious and fierce spirit. She said in an interview, "I'm like a hyena. I get into the garbage cans. I have an insatiable curiosity." The horses featured in this painting also tells us more about Carrington. Because of her interest in Celtic mythology, we can speculate that the horse outside could be the goddess Epona, who showed herself to her followers as a white horse. But the horse could also represent Carrington herself, as the horse was often used in her art as a symbol of herself, as well as freedom and liberty. Lastly, I also want to mention the clothes that she's wearing. Androgynous riding clothes, which brings in the theme of femininity and sexuality. So this painting talks a lot about Carrington's feelings and experiences during this time she spent in Paris. She was being rejected and shunned by her family because of her relationship with Max Ernst, but at the same time she found herself in a new, exciting place filled with her peers. But she was also not being taken seriously by her colleagues because of her, basically just because she was a woman. This painting was an attempt to put her own reality and experiences onto a canvas. She also painted a portrait of Max Ernst during this time. It was painted as a tribute to their relationship and features Ernst, shrouded in a red cloak, holding a lantern. A white horse, symbolizing Carrington, stands behind him, still and calmly observing him. The two of them are in an empty, barren landscape, showing how Carrington felt living in an isolated new country. And then the war happened. Max Ernst was arrested, leaving Carrington devastated. She wrote in her memoir how she couldn't eat or sleep and drank herself sick with orange blossom water. With the Nazis getting closer, Carrington and a family friend decided to flee to Spain. Carrington's mental health continued to worsen, and without her knowledge or consent, she was sent to an asylum on behalf of her father. She was told she was going on a day trip, but was then drugged and woke up later already admitted into the asylum. She was continuously restricted in her bed and treated with electroconvulsive therapy as well as drugs that induced epileptic fits. Friends and family described her as changed after she was released from the mental hospital. Carrington herself has talked about how she was changed and how she was now frightened in a way that she had never been before. It was like she suddenly realized just how fragile she was. During this time, she created her painting Green Tea, which depicts the sanatorium with its greens and labyrinthian grounds. After all of this, Carrington was then informed that her parents were planning on sending her to yet another asylum, this one in South Africa. When they traveled through Portugal, Carrington went to the Mexican embassy to seek out a friend, Renato Leduc. He was a friend of Pablo Picasso as well as a Mexican ambassador. and he agreed to marry Carrington to grant her immunity as a diplomat's wife. The couple then went to Mexico, where Carrington would live out the rest of her life. Mexico started out as a lonely time for Carrington. Her husband enjoyed going to the bar with his friends, leaving Carrington all alone at home, and after a while they ended up separating. Carrington started to befriend others in the same situation as her, people who had left their family behind to flee the war. One of them was Hungarian photographer Chiki, I love that name, who became the father of her 2 sons. She devoted the rest of her life to painting and became part of the Surrealist movement in Mexico. Another of her most famous paintings I want to talk about is called The Giantess. This painting features a giant woman in a red dress and green cape. She's towering over a forest beneath her, whilst geese are circling around her. The woman is protecting an egg, which can be seen as a symbol for her new life in Mexico. Geese are also often a symbol for migration, travel, and homecoming. Carrington passed away in 2011 at the age of 94. She was a huge influence in the Surrealism scene after World War II, but unfortunately her artistic contributions have often been overshadowed by her association with Max Ernst. She has received a lot more attention for her work in recent years though, and Carrington's use of folklore, magic, and autobiographical aspects in her work has paved the way for other female artists to be able to express their own female identity through their works. And that is all I have for this video. If you like this video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe, because that really does help out my channel. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!